All right. So, Matt, did you hear about the thieves who stole a calendar?
No, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, they each got 6 months.
And he's back.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Graveyard. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Adam.
And my name's Matt.
Now, pull up a tombstone or settle into your casket and get comfortable because this is Graveyard Tales. All right, everybody, here we are again on a supposed dark week. Matt, how are you doing on this supposed dark week?
I'm good, man. I love it. I love dark. I love recording on a dark week.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
I don't know. I don't have anything else to say.
Yeah.
Well, we're not supposed to record, but we are.
Right.
So there you go.
Right. And, this is a scheduled dark week. So technically you wouldn't be getting an episode, but Matt and I don't like, being gone for too long. So last week we were dark and had an off week. So this week, what we're going to do, we're going to put out a bonus episode for you guys. It's going to be similar to our Patreon episode, so you kind of get a taste of what that's like.
So we tell people, we say this quite often, that we're dark, and some of you that are new to the show might not know what that means. It basically means this: our sponsors and our host, we are obligated to put out 3 shows a month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we take 1 week off. And so that's our routine. But every once in a while, we get a month that has 5 weeks.
Right.
Okay. So our obligation is by month. So we are not obligated to record and publish a show for that 5th week. However, we don't like members of the Graveyard to go without something for an extra week.
Exactly.
Hence these type of episodes that, we call them bonus shows. We do something fun. So, in the past we've taken old Patreon episodes and put them out, for everybody, stuff like that. So we have a lot of fun with these. It's a little more relaxed. It may not be like a typical show. It's not as long as a typical show, but it's fun. And you don't have to wait 2 weeks to get a new Graveyard Tales.
Exactly. So that was a good, concise description of it. Because Matt's 100% correct. That's why we do it. So this one will be a little bit shorter. It won't be the full hour to hour and a half that we would normally do on a main episode, but we want to give you something here. So this has been a story that's fascinated me ever since I heard it many years ago. And I love this encounter, so I wanted to talk about it here, and then we can discuss it as we go, Matt, and then discuss your thoughts on it at the end. Now, this is the encounter of Albert Ostman. And some of you know when I say that name, you go, oh, yeah, I know that story. Some of you may not, so we're going to get into it here. Now, Albert Ostman was a Canadian prospector, and he lived from around 1893 to 1975. So he lived a good long life and had a very adventurous life, apparently. Now, in 1924, near the Toba Inlet in British Columbia, Albert Ostman wanted to take a little vacation. So he decided that he was going to go camping, which I enjoy camping, so that I can feel him on that. Well, on his way to the Toba Inlet, he met an old Native American man who warned him about, quote, mountain giants. who lived in the area, but Ostman wasn't buying into it. He's a grizzled old prospector and, just didn't believe in that sort of stuff.
Well, he'd never seen one. So
right, exactly.
Why would he think they exist?
Exactly. Now, he picked a spot near the Toba Inlet and he set up camp. Well, the first few mornings he was there, he noticed that something had been into his camp, rummaging around through his stuff during the night. So it started to get on his nerves that there was a nuisance raccoon or possum or something coming into his camp every night and messing up his stuff, throwing pots and pans around and getting into his knapsack and all that kind of stuff. So on the fourth night, he decided to do something about it. As he was preparing for bed, he shoved his knapsack down into the bottom of his sleeping bag, and he grabbed his shotgun and he slid into a sleeping bag fully clothed. He intended on staying awake and just pretending to be asleep until the critter came back, and then he would surprise it and shoot it. He'd be rid of the problem, and he'd also have a meal or two. So he figured, why not? That's the best solution he could come up with. But Albert fell asleep. So I think we've all been there. You try to stay up and do something, and then you end up falling asleep. As a kid, you try to stay up and wait for Santa, but you fall asleep, and then, crap, he visited while I was asleep, Well, Albert fell asleep, and he had been asleep for a little while when all of a sudden he felt his sleeping bag being lifted up by the open end, kind of like you'd pick up an open sack of potatoes. You grab the open end and close it with your fist, and then you sling it up over your shoulder, and he felt it being slung over the shoulder of something huge. Now, it felt to him like he was being carried by a giant human. Kind of tell that it's walking bipedally, and I'm thrown over its back. Now, he was carried in this state for somewhere between 3 to 4 hours. Now, finally, he was dropped on the ground, and he slowly crawled out of his sleeping bag to see where the hell he had been going, what had been going on, and just who had carried him this whole way. Now, when he looked up, he was staring at 4 large creatures covered from head to toe in brown hair. To him, it seemed to be a family of 4. The dad of the group, the one he had suspected had carried him, was at least 8 feet tall. Now, Ostman was quoted as saying this about the initial encounter. Quote, "They look like a family. Old man, old lady, and 2 young ones, a boy and a girl. The boy and the girl seemed to be scared of me. Well, the old lady did not seem too pleased about what the old man dragged home, but the old man was waving his arms and telling them all about what he had in mind, and then they all left, walked off and had their conversation elsewhere." So
at that point is when I leave.
Right. I was going to say, when they turn their back, you run.
That's right.
Now, Ostman said the creatures never made a move to harm him, so he never felt the need to use the gun that he had shoved down into his sleeping bag. But while in captivity, Ostman was fed, quote, sweet-tasting grass, which was washed, stacked, and given to him by the adult female Sasquatch. Now, he said the whole time he was there, the creatures spoke to each other in grunts and monosyllabic sounds, so they obviously had a language of some sorts. And you and I have talked about that before in things where it's proposed and hypothesized that Bigfoot do communicate with each other in that way. Now, Ostman said while stuck there, he tried to befriend the young male Sasquatch by giving him treats from the knapsack so that he could get the larger male interested in the snuff that he had in his bag. His plan was to get the large male to eat the whole can and either kill him or distract him long enough to get away. Ostman also apparently thought briefly about trying to take the young female Sasquatch with him when he escaped, but he decided not to in the end. He said, quote, "But what good would that have done? I would have to keep her in a cage for public display. I don't think we have any right to force our way of life on other people, and I don't think they would like it. The noise and racket in the modern city, they would not like any more than I do, end quote. So,
yeah. So, I mean, he had a conscience.
Right.
Hey, look, I realize that I'm not going to have any evidence that this happened at all unless I kidnap this young female. But that's a pretty crappy thing to do.
Right.
So I'm not going to do it.
And in a way, I'm glad he didn't.
Yeah.
In one way, it would have been nice to have that evidence, like you said. But in another way, don't do that to, a humanoid creature. That's wrong.
I got a feeling that if he had tried, he would have probably failed.
Yeah.
And, an angry 8-foot creature, especially if you had just taken, one of their children, is probably not going to be very forgiving when they eventually catch up to you.
Right. But kind of on that note, it did seem to him, though, that the dad squatch, and I came up with that term, dad squatch.
Yeah, I bet that's on a T-shirt somewhere.
It probably is, but I will plead ignorance because I haven't seen it. So dad squatch just came in my head when I was typing this up. But it did seem to him, though, that the dad squatch was trying to set him up with his daughter. He said for breeding purposes, he was thinking. So a little on the weird side there. It just took a weird turn.
Yeah, can you imagine being stuck in an arranged marriage with a Sasquatch?
No. I feel bad for Ashley being married to this Sasquatch. So, and she chose this. So,
yeah, I knew a guy in college though.
Yeah. So on the morning of about the 6th day, he was sitting around the fire that he had built in the Sasquatch camp, quote unquote, and he was brewing coffee and getting stuff out of his knapsack. Well, the dad squatch seemed interested in what he was doing, so Ostman took out his snuff can and held it up, took a pinch of the snuff and put it in his mouth. He then held the can up, offering it to the dad squatch. Well, dad squatch dumped the entire can in his mouth and swallowed.
Yeah.
So he seemed to immediately regret this because he started holding his stomach and yelling loudly. Well, he then grabbed Ostman's coffee pot and chugged the scalding hot coffee, which only made matters worse.
Yeah.
So he screamed and took off running, and Ostman figured he was running to try to find water. And he ended up being followed by his whole family, not knowing what was wrong with him. They were following him to try to figure out what was wrong. So Ostman took this moment to escape. He grabbed his knapsack and gun and took off running. Now, after escaping, Ostman eventually found some loggers, but he didn't tell them anything about the Sasquatch. Quote, "I told them I was a prospector and was lost. I did not like to tell them I had been kidnapped by a Sasquatch, as if I had told them, they would probably have said he is crazy too," end quote.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Ostman kept his experience to himself for decades out of fear of ridicule. He had never intended to tell anyone. But in 1957, he had been seeing a lot of reports from others about sightings and experiences with Sasquatch, so he decided finally to come forward. So he told his story to a local newspaper, and as one would expect, he and his story have been subjected to scrutiny ever since. So, Matt, let's scrutinize him and his story now.
All right.
You'll find some of the details of his time with the Sasquatches and his escape to be slightly different depending on where you read the encounter, but I tried to compile as many versions of it into this story. So, Matt, scrutinize away. It's happening for years anyway, so let's scrutinize this story.
Well, I mean, Ostman's story to Bigfoot believers is it's one of those that just really fuels your fire.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that not only would Sasquatch exist, but it exists with, a family orientation.
Right.
And with a language that it's not just a wild creature, that there's a hierarchy, that, there's a family unit with parents and children. And it just, it makes all of these people that have, pondered on the small pieces of what they call evidence, that this is how these creatures would behave.
Right.
And his story is just it's so fantastic, that they didn't harm him, that they wanted to have this interaction with him. They were very curious, about, perhaps what he was, and his practices. I thought it was interesting that in the story where it talks about him, them taking his coffee pot and drinking the scalding hot liquid, that they would have actually allowed and watched him brew coffee.
Right. Right.
So this would have required them to have either had fire themselves or watched him make a fire.
Yeah, and not get freaked out by it. Exactly.
So, you can go either way, but you would think that a wild creature unfamiliar with fire would have panicked.
Sure. Yep.
Certainly wouldn't have allowed it to continue long enough for him to brew coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I would imagine some people will take that as this part of it is too outlandish. That this probably would have not happened. That a creature such as a Sasquatch wouldn't have given him, especially if they were keeping him captive, wouldn't have given him access to fire, even if they knew what it was, or certainly wouldn't have allowed him to just sit there and go about his own business and build one.
Right.
Without being more curious of the fire. And then obviously they saw him drink the coffee, because if a Bigfoot grabbed the coffee pot to drink it, thinking that was going to help his upset stomach from eating an entire can of snuff, they already were aware that what he was doing was drinkable.
Right. Right.
If this thing can drink it, so can we. Maybe not necessarily understanding that it would be hot.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of makes me think, okay, they didn't have fire. They didn't necessarily, cook their food, but they were willing to allow this to happen, maybe out of simple curiosity.
Well, I was going to say,
what is he doing?
At that point, then you kind of have to think, okay, maybe they don't have fire. They don't know how to harness fire. But they are intelligent enough to know that, or to be curious about, let's let this guy do his thing and see what he does. Let's observe, allow him to do his thing. And then they're learning as he's doing it. So, if we're taking this story as true, then either, like you said, either they used fire and knew about it, or they just were in the observing mode and they wanted to see what he was going to do and everything. And, maybe they would have just let him wander off. Maybe it could have been that thing where he just, I'm leaving now, and they wouldn't have fought to keep him there, but he didn't try. He didn't say that it was obvious that they wouldn't let him leave, because they kind of just accepted him into their social circle. He was feeding, he was being fed grass by the mom squatch, the son was hanging around and very curious about what he was doing. And so it seemed like they had just kind of, picked him up, dropped him into their thing and said, okay, let's see what he does. He can watch us and, cohabitate. So I don't know. I understand what you're saying about the, that is a point that you have to look at and go, I don't know, because if they had no idea about fire and they weren't super intelligent enough to say, hey, let me be observant of what he's doing, and I'm not going to freak out because he's doing it and he must know what he's doing. If they were wild, feral type creatures, they probably would have freaked out and either ran from the fire or done what they do if there's a forest fire and they try to put it out, in some way. So I don't know. I get it.
Yeah, but and going back to the beginning of the story, this the abduction happened on night number 4.
Right.
But his camp was invaded the 3 nights prior. So
right.
That possibly means that he was being observed prior to this.
I would assume so, yeah.
And would have had a campfire, would have made coffee, would have cooked. So there's a good chance that the dad squatch witnessed all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And made the, inference that this was normal behavior.
Yep.
And to see him do it after he brought them, perhaps that was exactly what he intended.
Yeah. Yep.
Dad squatch witnesses this for 3 days. The man goes to sleep. Sasquatch comes in, starts pilfering around. What does this guy got? What is this? What is he eating here?
Mm-hmm.
Makes a mess of the camp, but then eventually says, well, if he's doing it here, maybe he'll do it for the rest of my family.
Yeah.
And so when I go back, same way, I'm going to take him.
Yeah.
So he can show them, look at this, look, watch this person. What's this creature that maybe I've seen before but have shied away from, or that we want to understand. He doesn't seem violent or threatening, and plus I'm 8 feet tall.
Yeah.
So, I could obviously overtake him if I wanted to.
Yeah. And like Ostman said, he thought about taking the daughter squatch with him as showing off this creature. What if that's what the dad squatch was doing? He's like, look, my family's never going to believe that I ran into a human and observed a human for 3 nights. So,
yeah, exactly.
I've got to take him back and prove to them that, and maybe he said in his story that as Dad Squatch was telling it to the wife, who wasn't very pleased about having the human there, he was wildly gesturing and stuff. Maybe it was no, honey, look, I watched him build a fire. I promise you, this is gonna be cool. Just watch him, let him stay. If it doesn't work out, I'll kill him. It'll be fine. Nobody will miss him. But just let's watch him for a while, You ever bring something home and you got to convince your wife that, no, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. I'll take care of it.
This sounds like the conversation I had with Amanda about letting Brooks get a bearded dragon. Yeah, it's going to be fine.
Yep.
He's plenty old enough to take care of it and feed it and make sure,
right. It's going to be fine.
It's not going to get that big.
Yeah. If anything happens, later. Right. If anything happens, I'll deal with it. You don't have to worry about it. And maybe that's what it was. I would have loved to have known what Dad Squatch had been saying there, because I feel like it would be hilarious.
What if old Mama Squatch was like, another one?
Oh,
why
yeah,
do you
that's
keep
true.
Bringing these things here.
Yeah, it's the 4th one this month that you've done this to. You either kill them or they escape.
Coming forward with this story. So,
right, true. Well, he must have squished them then. I mean,
that's right. They eventually acted up and became dinner.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why he wasn't scared of fire, is because he had cooked a human over fire before. They built the fire and then he cooked them over it. I don't know. But yeah, this is a story that I have been fascinated with for so long, just because you don't hear stories like this. This is one of the few, if the only story. It's the only story I know of that somebody was abducted and held captive by Sasquatch for 6 days.
Yeah.
You know, you hear encounters and maybe they'll meet up with the Bigfoot and share things and all that. But, you know, you don't hear within the last 100 years, modern stories of people being abducted by Bigfoot. There's stories of, you know, wild men coming into settlers' camps and taking a child, and then the child grows up as a wild man kind of thing. You know, we run across those stories, but not one in this nature where he's out camping, he gets abducted, and everything's fine, and then he just leaves and goes on about his life. It's the only one I know of like that.
Yeah, and you know, if this had been me, when I encountered the loggers, I don't know that I would have been able to hold my tongue, whether they thought I was a lunatic or not.
Yeah, sure.
I would have just been like, "You won't believe this."
Yeah. Yep. You'll never believe it.
I was
abducted by a Sasquatch. They held me for 6 days. I finally fed them snuff and coffee, and I got out of there. And the guy's like, "Oh no, we need to take him to the doctor."
But you know what? I would think that if anybody around that time would have had some experience with these creatures, it would have been the loggers.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know, even if they never actually saw one, they probably would have seen the evidence of one because they're out in the forest cutting down their habitat.
Yep.
You know, at some point in time, they're making enough noise to attract, you know, at least one.
Mm-hmm.
And if they didn't see it, they probably would have seen evidence that something had been there around, you know, their site where they were working. So
True.
those would have probably been the guys that would have been the most receptive to this story, at least I think.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's stories from the 50s, 60s, 70s of loggers in the Pacific Northwest that said they have had experiences with Sasquatch, that they come in the next morning and around their equipment, they see big footprints all around their equipment.
Yeah.
Some of them have said they've seen one lurking in the background while they're doing their work. So you're absolutely right. A logger would be one of the ones that would see it. And so he could have probably told them that. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, I mean, we know Frank. Frank's always overlooking at what we do. And, you know, he's cool. His wife's a little mean. His kids are kind of dumb, but he's cool, you know."
Yeah.
So maybe it would have been a whole different story if he'd have just told the loggers.
Yeah, we may have had this story, you know, much earlier than we do, and I mean it's fine. I mean he had a reason for not sharing the story, and then he held on to it for a long time. I would think that this is a story that you tell your kids and your grandkids about.
Oh yeah,
you know, so that you know they would have grown up with the knowledge of this, even if you didn't share it publicly.
Right.
You know, but if you're Ostman and you start seeing stories coming out where people are coming forward describing exactly the same type of creature that you interacted with years ago, then maybe you thought, okay, well, it's time. It's time to share this story.
Yep. You see it and people are, 30 years later, you're finally getting some validation for it. And you're like, okay, all right. Plus at that age, he's probably so old. He's like, I don't care if they think I'm crazy. What do I have to lose now?
That's true,
But that's all I got. And I thought this was a interesting story and wanted to share it. So I hope everybody enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it, Matt.
Hey, I did. It is a fantastic story, even if we kind of pick it apart, but it's fun. And like I said, it's one of those stories that just fuels the Bigfoot fire.
Oh, yeah.
That keeps people interested, keeps people coming out, and looking for footprints and broken limbs and things like that. Bigfoot's one of my favorite.
Yeah.
I love the idea that that this creature may exist in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, if you haven't already, go and listen to our episode about Bigfoot. You know,
that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, but it was a great show. We really touch on a lot of aspects of what Bigfoot could be, you know, how it came to be, and a lot of experiences people have had. We did not talk about this story.
No.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun. So if Bigfoot's your deal and you hadn't found that one yet, go back and check it out. But yeah, you know, I think it's great. I mean, I really, really do.
Yeah. And you know how I feel about Bigfoot. Bigfoot is almost an obsession of mine. Bipedal hominids in general. Bigfoot just being the one that's the story has been around for so long, including dogmen and stuff like that into the bipedal hominids. But Bigfoot it's just that thing that I've been fascinated with for so many years, and I continue to be. And the more research I do on it, and the more stories I hear about it, the more fascinated I get. You know, it doesn't quench the fire any to hear stories, or even to hear, you know, people try to debunk it or anything like that. It just kind of fuels my fire. Well, we got to find some evidence. We got to do some research and find some evidence. You know, that's all it does to me. So, but thanks everybody for listening to this bonus. We will be back next week with a full length normal Graveyard Tales episode. So if you just hate this format that we just did, then just wait about a week.
We got more coming.
Yeah, the normal one will show up.
We got longer shows for you to hate.
Yep, exactly. But yeah, so thank you guys, and we'll talk to y'all again here in a week or so.